Good morning. Good morning, Allison. And good morning to all y'all at home and those who have made the journey to be here together this morning. It's good to see you, and it's good to imagine you. Today, we're going to be talking about depth, and we're going to be inspired to talk about depth by our theme this month, which is brought to us by Soul Matters, and our theme this month is listening. So with that, I would invite you to do that very thing. Not to be cut off, not through the slightest partition, shut out from the law of the stars. The inner, what is it if not intensified sky? Hurled through with birds and deep with the winds of homecoming. Hopefully that sounds a little familiar. Our mission here at North Shore Unitarian is to empower one another to live with greater depth and meaning and purpose. Now, when I saw that statement, back when I was casting about looking for a congregation to serve, I lit right up. I remember reading it on the computer in the bathtub. It's a laptop, by the way, and it wasn't plugged in, but that mission statement electrified me nonetheless. Now, ever since we got together then, I've been wanting to attend to these three qualities, to explore what about them was so riveting for me. Now, you all conspired to create them, so I assume that there is a substantial charge for you around what they are calling us to be and do. And yet, I have to confess that when I gave them a little more attention beyond their initial allure, I found that it was a slippery fish to hold. It wasn't apparent to me immediately what these concepts meant. What is depth? Depth of what? What do we mean by meaning? What purpose is the right purpose? Or is just purpose in and of itself enough? Our new monthly theme, that of listening, which comes to us from our relationship with the Soul Matters material, seemed like a good opportunity to plumb the depths of depth, explore the meaning of meaning, and discover the purpose of purpose. So today, we will be listening to depth. Now, at first blush, I would suggest that depth has something to do with repetition. Even if it is a one-off experience of expansiveness, the memory of that experience is powerful enough to return to again and again. That memory of depth shapes us as we change and then return to its influence, changed, become changed by it, return to its influence, and so on. And I like that because it picks up some threads from last week. The spiral of life, right? And in that sense, it occurs to me that depth has some propulsion to it. But before we get too deeply into it, pardon the expression, I'd like to bring in another spirit into this reflection. I'd like our service associate, Ryan Gunther, to speak to his understanding of depth.
When I think about depth, I think of contradictions. Life is full of contradictions, and the secret of deeper understanding is accepting that some things can be both true and false simultaneously, depending on your perspective. No man ever steps in the same river twice. I love sayings like that because structurally they're almost identical to jokes, and as you may know, I love jokes. It's a form of double entendre, using the vagaries of language to say two things at the same time. One of them obvious, and one hopefully surprising. Of course, jokes are only about subverting your expectations to create that surprise without any deeper meaning. E. Cummings was anti-communist, but he was also an anti-capitalist. Unlike jokes, aphorisms don't generally make you laugh, but they both make you think, and they both give you a pleasurable physiological response when you get it, because they're both fundamentally a form of problem solving. The eye cannot see itself. Here is a statement which on the surface is false, as anyone who's ever used a mirror to extract a stray eyelash can attest. But on a deeper level, it's true, and the fact that you have to think about it for a second somehow makes it more true, or at least more impactful than if you just said people have no self-awareness. The contradiction gives it weight because it's more like life, which is simultaneously effortless and difficult, overwhelming and incredibly boring. Good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Superficially, this is a contradiction because it's basically saying that the only way to avoid mistakes is to make mistakes. But it's also literally true, and yet that truth doesn't remove the contradiction. If anything, the contradiction is part of the truth. Accepting the contradiction is like the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing that Frankenstein is not the monster. Wisdom is knowing that Frankenstein is the monster. And so this morning I dedicate the lighting of our flaming chalice to those contradictions which offer us a portal to deeper understanding. We kindle this flame as a symbol of our gathering. And now I invite those of you at home to sing our opening hymn with your mouths open, and those of us here, please hum along, and the words will be on the screen.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts, Ryan. I love that observation and reminder that wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from bad experiences. And it makes me think that I'm always trying to give you all a spiritual experience, which means all I have to do, I think, is be terrible, and then you'll have a spiritual experience because it was a bad decision. I don't know. But I like that. Thank you. So our mission is to empower one another to live with more depth. What does that mean? If we can't say what it means, how are we supposed to empower each other toward it? So I'm probably going to complicate the easy again. But when I ask myself what it is to live with more depth, as differentiated from meaning, which you all have done, I don't have a ready answer. At least I didn't before I sat down to write this reflection. So, technically, depth is a measurement. It measures the distance between top and bottom. But it also implies a width. Otherwise, it would just be height. A pool is deep, not high. A string is long, not deep, unless it's plumb lining a hole. Right? And so depth seems to convey a sense of volume with associational hints at the subterranean. We do not think of atmosphere in terms of depth, but we do think that way about the earthly crust and the oceanic flows beneath us. So color and taste also can have depth, and analysis can be said to have depth. These also speak to notions of volume and substrate. There's something more, something beyond or within our initial apprehension of a sensation, even if that sensation is a thought. So this carries us into the colloquial, where depth speaks as much to an experience as it does to any kind of measurement. A profound event or thought can be said to have depth, like, whoa, dude, that was deep. It's an expression then of bewilderment, of awe, and expansion. But wonder and awe, these are also not measurements, they're emotions. And more than that, they're emotions that do things. They make us feel both more humble, right? Imagine the last time that you felt awe. Awe and bewilderment make us feel both more humble and also more connected. For instance, you may notice that when you feel awe, it has a sort of immediate association or resonance with a feeling of love. So the last time that you saw a starry sky or a beautiful sunset or a new grandchild, you were filled with the awe of those moments, events, and experiences. But I bet you that you also felt something akin to, or probably exactly like love. So, awe for what you behold resonates and echoes in a way as awe for your own being and for love of your own being. But our mission is not to live with greater awe, meaning, and purpose, though that would be extremely exciting if you would all had chosen that. Though I think you were wise and braver to have chosen depth instead. I think awe is perhaps a little safer and a little bit more passive than depth. So like awe, depth expands our consciousness and leads us to love. But depth asks more of us. Depth requires us to activate and live into the agency that we have. As life-changing as awe can be, if it isn't cultivated, it can be a superficial visitation of the sensational. Depth, on the other hand, requires our responsibility. Whereas awe is immediate, depth takes work. So when we encourage each other to live with greater depth, we're asking each other to do some work. Awe speaks to revelation, an interaction with the previously incomprehensible. Depth, which I would say is an umbrella under which awe can fit, depth rather speaks to relationship, an increasing familiarity. Right? An increasing familiarity with the webbing undergirding, ultimately, all being. An increasing familiarity with the implications and ingredients of the relationships that, taken as a whole or in their particulars, may be spoken of as God or the Force or the Tao. That is ultimately where depth leads us to. So in a sense, depth is a growing comprehension of the relationships within relationships. Depth is about becoming familiar with these relationships. I mean, relationships are extremely important, but they just happen all the time. They're how anything that is. So while they're fundamental, they're not particularly special. Familiarity is the key. It's the difference. Familiarity will carry us into depth. Familiarity requires recognition. That is to say, recognition. That is to say, a knowing return. Depth requires a knowing return. We seek to encourage one another to live with greater depth. It's worth asking, what do we return to?
I invite you to use this sound as a pathway down into whatever it is that Ron's been speaking about that speaks to you.
Not to be cut off. Not through the slightest partition shut out from the law of the stars. The inner. What is it if not intensified sky? Hurled through with birds and deep with the winds of homecoming. So this poem by Rainier Rilke set the tone for our first Sunday back together in early September. I used it then to frame and inspire my thoughts about home and homecoming. Today, I want to engage with it as a means to practice the knowing return required by our quest for depth. So I want to knowingly come back to this poem by Rilke, spend more time with it, spend some time talking with you about it as a sort of test of the hypothesis that depth is brought to us by a recognition. So the poem is not, of course, the only means through which we, as a community, can come to depth. Depth is about becoming familiar with connections between time and place and identity, between components that make a thing, say a poem or a ritual, but also the trajectories that spill from it. Not to be cut off is nothing if not a yearning for that experience of depth, not through the slightest partition shut out from the essential web work of the universe, the law of the stars. When we behold the stars as objects, they are made distant. But beheld as Rilke, they are not only immediate, but they are internalized. The inner. For his yearning for their immense and infinite and coursing patterning thrusts him immediately into, not the far off, but the inner, nullifying entirely the division between the transcendent and the immanent. And then to wonder at it, the inner, What is it? To wonder at our essential usness, our thoughts, our souls, our inner lives, our imaginations, our intensified sky, our breath. The inner, what is it? If not intensified sky, breathe in with me now. Just take a breath of that. The inner, taking the air into the inner, the intensified sky, metaphorical and literal. The inner, what is it if not intensified sky? And here is the understanding that breath and spirit and imagination are inseparable in beings such as we. Hurled through with birds. Hurled through with birds, with life, with intuitive action and grace and song, with flocking and disillusion. Kinetic, starbird souls are we, whose boundaries are not drawn along the line of inner and outer. I am of thee and you are of me, with everything. And so we are home. I was at home the other night when out my window I saw a star. And this is not as common a thing as it sounds. I live, as you know, in a city that's in the light shadow of a bigger city, all of which dims the stars. And then, of course, our city is in the Pacific Northwest, right? So, like half the year, the clouds have partitioned me, if not from the law of the stars, then from their light. And then also I'm a dad. So it's not like I have a nightlife that takes me often outside in the dark. And certainly during the summertime, the dark waits until I'm too tired to see it. And in the wintertime, it gets too cold to be outside in the dark. So seeing stars anymore is a pretty rare thing for me. Sometime after tucking the girls into bed the other night, I was writing in a chair by a window, and I looked up to recognize a star or a planet or a celestial being of one kind or another staring back at me. And in that moment, it became quite clear that my love for my girls is somehow connected to that star. I was feeling a connection to that star, a through line from me. They were simultaneous. They were in harmony with each other, if not the same sensation. And that star now, it could have been any star. It could have been the furthest visible star. So can you imagine how far away that star might have been? I suppose even if it was the closest possible star outside of our own, could you imagine how far away that star would be? Impossibly far. And yet, it was connected to me. I was connected to it. Not just spiritually or emotionally, but physically. It is connected to me by successive, inseparable, and interpenetrating layers of inhale to exhale to atmosphere to stratosphere on up to where there is no black line border between space and air, and on into each of the layered particles of dark matter that follow on all the way from my love for my girls to the star giving me its light. Starlight is deep time, connected to my affection. And it occurred to me that love is indeed timeless. And the light itself, from so far away, unimpeded to me. Can you imagine the chances of that? And that light itself is not only an actual visible connection, but a testament to the invisible, successive connections between me and it. And if between me and it, then between me and everything. Everything. Everything, 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 everything. Connected to me. And all to all, and that means to you. So me to you. And you to everything, everything, everything. But you gotta breathe right to feel it. So depth is about what's beyond, within, around, and implied by the superficial. It is about connections and substance, and the substance between substances, between substances. It is about patterns within patterns, patterns extrapolated from patterns. Depth is about what's more than initial. So depth requires commitment and patience. It requires receptivity and possibly even resiliency. Depth is not ever only immediate. It requires recognition, a knowing return. So how do we encourage each other to greater depth? Well, one, we have to maintain this community that seeks to do that very thing, its values, traditions, and mission. We need to spend time thinking about and practicing each of those, our values, tradition, and mission, both within the community and in our lives when we go home, when we're out in the world. Another way to encourage one another to do this is simply to listen. Listen to one another, yes, but also listen to our rituals, to their reasons, their history, and the words we speak around them. We have elements here that we return to again and again. The more knowingly we do that, the more depth we will have. We cultivate traditions, both new and old, not to be beholden to them as superstitious artifacts of the status quo, but to listen to their wisdom, both ancient and new. In this Twitter-addicted dopamine culture and 24-hour news cycle, depth is countercultural. It's slow in the best way possible. Depth is like slow awe. It's awe with duration, reliable wonder, ultimately conveying to us an inspiring, lasting love that spills over from that which inspired it into us and all that we behold, to which we return to, knowingly, again and again. So in this COVID era of worshiping together or practicing together with 25 people in the room, unable to sing, sometimes inspires us to ask questions that we never thought of before. One of the questions that came up today was, do we ask people to stand during the hymns, even though we're not singing? And so we may do that at some point in the future and just find out what that I don't know what you guys will do exactly if you can't sing but are asked to stand. And, so we'll play with that. We'll see what happens. It'll be a little experiment. What's not an experiment, and what actually is an example of, well, I suppose everything's an experiment in a way, but what is an example of our cultivation of depth, or an opportunity to do so, is the liturgy of this service, and this moment in particular, for example, where I invite you all to pray with me. Now, every time I do that, I will begin in the same fashion. I will pray or invoke the same 4 elements. I will invoke the sun, I will invoke the earth, I will invoke water, and I will invoke air, right? So in terms of this solar system, that's the order in which those things came to be, for one. The sun came first, then a bunch of rocks got together, became the earth, then somehow we got water, maybe it was a meteor, I'm not sure. I don't know if anyone's sure. And then lastly, we had atmosphere. I think that's the proper order of their development. So there's a tip of the hat to science in that prayer. Also, I refer to them every single time as you. We thank you, sun, to sort of acknowledge the sun is a being in and of itself. Now, whether or not that has consciousness or not, I'll leave up to you to determine, but I'm going to thank that being and all of its interconnectedness, and I'm going to thank the being of earth, and I'm going to thank the being of water. So these are things that I will say at the beginning of every prayer that we do from here until such time as it evolves. But for now, you can know that that's happening every Sunday, and hopefully returning to that knowingly will deepen your experience with this moment. So, that said, I invite you to pray with me. And we start with gratitude. We say, thank you, sun, for your light and for your warmth, the gift of energy. We thank you, earth, for holding us and for giving us bodies to hold others with. We thank you, air, or for water. We thank you, water, for life. And we thank you, air, for showing us how the Spirit moves and for being the substance that connects us with one another and all this physical world. And to those beings in the world that they have created, I want to express gratitude for this community, for its wisdom and mission, and for its ability to hold each other. We want to pray for those who within this community are struggling with health issues or concerns, and pray for their medical providers that they might be wise and compassionate and skilled. We want to pray for the families of those folks who lost lives to the Capilano River this week. And for the skill of those rescue workers who saved those who they could. Amen.
We are a busy congregation, in some ways busier than ever, and right now really the only way to find out what is going on is to read your weekly e-bulletin that comes in your email. I personally have never opened it, but I hear there's a lot of good information in there. It's only partially true. I would especially like to welcome any of you people who are watching at home who have never physically been here. If you are enjoying this weekly television show that you've been watching and you want to hear more about what is going on, then I encourage you to email Janny in the church office to get signed up for the e-bulletin. And now some specific announcements. We need new volunteers to run the soundboard. So if you've ever figured out how to adjust the stereo in a rental car, you can work the soundboard. But there will be training. So if you're interested or at least willing, contact Jenny in the office. The anti-racist group assignment is coming out soon. So if you signed up for that, watch your emails for the assignment. And the small group Soul Matters Light, the small group ministries that Ron wants everyone to sign up for, will be starting soon, so that's another thing to watch for. And also, Allison is recruiting a chimes ensemble. So if you are one of those people who's never joined the choir because you say that you can't sing, now is your time, because nobody can sing. So this is a way to get together and make music right here. So talk to Allison about that. And finally, our plate collection this month will be given to the North Shore Multicultural Society, which provides services to help newcomers settle and succeed in our local North Shore community. There are baskets on the floor by the exits where you can leave your donations if you're here in person. And for those of you watching at home, I invite you to donate via e-transfer. The instructions are in the e-bulletin, just like everything else. So just make sure that you put NSMS in the message box. Please give as generously as you are able. We extinguish this flame. The world calls us to live with depth and also meaning and purpose.
Please rise and bow to your spirit for the benediction. As we leave this sacred time and place that we have created together, whether you are here or at home, let us go forth with the intention to knowingly return to specific aspects of our life, including those which we have here in this congregation, in order to cultivate for ourselves and one another that sense of depth. Now, let us go forth singing and reading our e-bulletin. Don't forget to read your e-bulletin. I'm literally talking to you right now. Read your e-bulletin. It's how we stay together in these times. So let us go singing.